Welcome, lean leaders, to Leading Excellence, where we explore all the opportunities for us to become better leaders, to transform your organizations to organizations of excellence and leading excellence and a culture of excellence. Today, I want to introduce you to my guest, Vanessa Gallo, who is a longtime friend of mine and her family and her husband, Carmine Gallo. So, as Vanessa would say, is that anyone can become a great speaker. She does her work on this all the time, working with some of the best in the country on their communication skills. You think about it, all they need to know is just to invest some time in their message, crafting that message, practicing that message, and need to understand their own natural abilities. Vanessa is co-owner of Gallo Communications with her husband, Carmine Gallo, the world famous author who recently published the Bezos Blueprint. In fact, Carmine did a little background interviewing with me on how Special Forces communicates as part of this. He's also known for his other books that have been published in almost 40 languages and 10 books translated so far. So Carmine's written the books Talk Like Ted, which I have on my bookshelf, Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, which is required study and reading at the Lean Leadership Academy, and the Bezos Blueprint. Vanessa also teaches communications at the San Francisco State University. She also teaches executive communication at the Harvard Graduate School of Design and with her husband, Carmine Gallo. And outside of teaching, she's also coached several executives from Fortune 500 companies, including such brands as Intel, Chevron, Coca-Cola, Yum Brands, Constellation Brands, to develop their leaders into extraordinary communicators. She also has done a lot of work with Fortune 500 agribusinesses, companies like Ocean Mist, Taylor Farms, Earthbound Farms, and helped their leaders in their brand storytelling skills. She has a developmental psychology background. She also works as a communications expert with a developmental psychological background. She also has served as the principal selection committee for the Catholic education in the Oakland Diocese. She currently resides with her family in Pleasanton, California, with Carmine and their two daughters. So I'd like to welcome to the show today Vanessa Gallo.
Hi,
Welcome, Vanessa.
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I thank you for the time. So you and I go back a ways, and we often talk about leadership and body language. I think we started talking about the effect of the digital transformation back when I was on a working group or steering committee for the Special Warfare Center here at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, North Carolina, where we were looking at Special Forces officer candidates. Once they had gone through selection and gotten into the Special Forces qualification course, which we call Q course for short, we were starting to find that something had changed from the earlier days, that it seemed like they lost their ability to empathize with the folks that they were talking about, keeping in mind that a Special Forces leader at a captain's level will have to deal with warlords, politicians, future political leaders of the countries that the U.S. has an interest in. So their communication skills, their ability to read a room and influence the room through their communications, through their nonverbal communications, is paramount. Well, we started to notice that the psychopathy scores were going up. About for every 10 points that someone's IQ went up over about 140, it dropped about 10% on their emotional quotient as far as their empathy. So if you got someone that was 160 IQ, we would find them that they had dropped 20 to 40 points on their EQ. Well, as you would expect as a special operator, especially in special forces, where we're working with people at all different educational levels, all different background levels as far as the parts of the government they may work with, the ability to read a room, notice if you're influencing someone, not just through verbal communications, but through their body language, to be able to command the room and have what we like to call a command presence, started to drop off somewhere after about 2015 to 2018. What we think happened based on some of the research was that the digitation of the communications platforms had started to cause people not to be able to effectively develop their body language skills, not only their own body language, but the ability to influence through nonverbal communications and read nonverbal communications. In fact, I had a couple of chief engineers told me that during COVID, when everybody went to Zoom, that before long, because they couldn't read anything from about here up, they could read their eyes and their facial expressions, but they lost their body language, nonverbal communication skills on how they were reading their body language. And so after a while, as you well know, that during COVID, uh, everybody started turning off their Zoom cameras. So then those leaders that I was talking to said, I lost the ability to read the room at all. And I even see that continuing on today. Did a Teams meeting yesterday, and about two of the participants didn't have their camera on at all. So I can't read their body language or their facial expressions. So the first question after that long intro is, have you seen with the leaders that you've been working with the use of texting, the use of Zoom with and without cameras having an effect on their ability to communicate effectively and be able to use nonverbal communications as well? So what are you finding as you do your clinical work?
I would say definitely yes. And there's really three factors that I would be looking at. The first would be you don't have a face, right? In text, you can't really read tone. In email, you most people tend to not read email if it goes too deep and you have to scroll too long. So in terms of text and email, yes, Zoom has become, I would say, the devil. You have to be really skilled at communicating to be able to use it effectively. And one of the biggest problems with Zoom is that humans don't want to look at the camera. I'm looking at the camera right now. We want to look at our avatar. So I'm looking at your face on the avatar. I'm looking at my face on the avatar. But what does that mean? I'm not connecting with my listener. So in order for the listener to have my face, I have to look in the camera. But then what does that do? I can't read the face. So
Oh, that's a good point. I haven't
there's a
even thought about
disconnect
that.
there because so Zoom definitely throws a problem there. Another thing I find with Zoom when I get video samples from executives. I had a CEO of a startup, confidential information, of course. He sent me
Yes, yes.
a 90-minute board meeting via Zoom to analyze. And the first 30 minutes was just getting everything figured out, and the whole time he's looking down at his computer. He's not even looking at the screen. So it's just a really difficult platform to be able, you have to be on for your listener. But if you are on for your listener, you're not able to fully read them. So that poses a challenge. And what I find highly valuable analyzing video, if I'm lucky enough to get a sample of a presenter where the camera alternates between the speaker and the audience, it's like a gold mine
Hmm.
because I take screenshots of the faces in the audience and I compare it with the messaging that's being delivered at the same timestamp. And I guarantee if the messaging is boring and not packaged well, the faces of the audience are either looking down at their phone, they're asleep, or not paying attention. So a lot of this comes back to messaging. So it's when you don't have the face, there's damage. So you're not going to have the face in text, you're not going to have the face in email, and if you are delivering your Zoom properly, looking into the camera so your audience can see your face, you're not getting the face as a speaker to get that feedback. And then I think the final piece I cannot ignore as a psychologist is temperament and personality.
Oh,
That,
yeah.
if you have a high
You mean
IQ,
an emoji doesn't do that for me when I'm doing a text, and I'm getting
I
little
do
hearts,
like,
little
I do,
smiley faces?
I do like emojis actually, very much so, because emojis give the emotion to the text that you can't deliver without having the face. Now, I would expect someone with a high IQ to have lower social abilities. So
As we
that I
found
think
in the
you
study, yeah.
can't, regardless of digital, the digital transformation, regardless if you're in person or text or email, there is personality differences. Some
Mhm.
people are just better at reading others. However, you can still get good at it. And it's not going to help you if you're never able to actually look at the people that you're talking to.
So, well, since we're on that subject, before we go into other parts of the body language, so if you are on a Zoom meeting, if you are on a Teams meeting, or if you're doing a webinar, well, just stay with the Zoom meetings and the Teams meetings. What can you do as a leader to better connect with the audience in order to read their body language, but also influence them through your own expressions and so forth?
Yeah, so I love the rule of three. I would say the first thing you can do, if there's a way that you can format your digital format so that you can see the avatars of your listeners and also yourself, as many people as possible. It depends on the platform. You can actually scroll through and see all the people that are listening in. I, as the leader, usually ask the participants to keep their camera on,
Mm-hmm.
and I fully disclose I want your camera on because it helps me to understand if you get what I'm saying, and I can only do that by seeing you. So I make that clear up front. And I usually stop and I will ask questions that I need an answer. I feel free to use the raising hand icon or unmute yourself and start speaking. I want to hear from you on XYZ. Then I can take my eyes off the camera and I can start scanning the faces. And oh, this person is not even listening. This person is deer in the headlights. This person seems interested. So those are some methods I use. Another thing that's important to keep people engaged is not to talk for too long. I have to change the
Okay.
method. Got it. Every 10 minutes, something has to change. Either I'm going to show you a video, or I'm going to stop talking and ask a question, or I'm going to put you in a breakout group and you work with each other. And then you come back and I'm going to engage the group in a discussion. And then I'm going to talk again for 5 minutes. Then I'm going to show a video. I have to constantly be throwing the balls in the air to keep people engaged, because when you're in person, it's easier to keep people engaged than the Zoom platform. In the Zoom platform,
Mhm.
it's an uphill climb because people can still turn their camera off whether you ask them to put it on or not. And they're multitasking and doing other stuff. They're in their pajamas with their slippers and nobody knows. They're, doing more things than they would be afforded to do in a live audience. So it makes it
Mhm.
even more of a challenge. But clear parameters up front. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about XYZ. Here's my log line. The most important thing you need to know from this Zoom meeting is this. I would love for you to keep your camera on so that I can read your faces and make sure what I'm saying is clear to you. I'm going to be asking questions. You're going to be watching video. Here we go. So
Oh, okay.
clear.
So you prep them for how you're going to run the Zoom meeting, and
And
you
then if
tell them.
they, oh, wow, she's going to show me a video. So I better not put myself on, you know, I better not turn my camera off and mute myself and go walk into the other room and make breakfast because she said she's going to show me 3 videos.
Right.
So it takes time to figure out how to do it. Now, I could go on forever about how to make the Zoom platform effective. It is challenging.
Mhm.
And if you're the leader of that communication, you need to be willing to try things.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So, and now that I'm thinking about that, you brought up something about the agenda, and of course, going back to Carmine's book on the presentation secrets of Steve Jobs. One of the things he recommends is to add a new voice, right? So every so often add a new voice. So I think that's great.
I like what you said, add a new voice. How can you do that? You can add a new voice by showing a video
Hmm.
and then take yourself off. So now they're not listening to me, they're listening to you. You can also add a new voice if you have the opportunity and the luxury of having a co partner.
Right.
That's fabulous. So, like, if I'm on, Carmine is watching the crowd and messaging me, oh, X, Y, and Z, they don't get what you said. You need to repeat that story, right? And if he's
Oh,
on, then I can watch, I can read the chat, I can watch people to get a read of how they're interacting, engaging. So when you have partners, great. Or show a video, takes it off of you. It's some of the best audiobooks. Publishers will hire actors to play the voice of certain roles. So you have the author doing the
right.
voice, and then you've got different people because the brain perks up when it hears a different voice. So I'm
Right.
going to pass it back to you. I wanted to mention that in reference to add a voice.
No, that's absolutely. Yeah, that again, that's one of the things that all of my students at Lean Leadership Academy, they learn to partner in their presentations to add a new voice, to tell a story. I do it in teams so they build their communication skills. What I liked was that on the team, when you're speaking, basically Carmine is being a producer and
Hmm.
looking at the audience, sending you little notes, and then when Carmine's speaking, you're being the producer and you're letting him know how they're doing. I haven't yet cracked the code on the ability to read all the little hands going up and all that kind of stuff. I guess I need to get my wife to be my producer
It's
for
hard
me.
to do on your own. It's
Yeah.
hard to do on your own. And I also find that some people like to speak up and some people don't. So I always invite them going back to the beginning, laying the groundwork. If you don't want to speak up, that's okay. I still want to see your ideas. I still want to see your comments. Please put them in the chat.
So, how do you get? I think that's one thing that Zoom allows you to do that you can't do in a live room, which is how do you get the introverts more engaged than just the extroverts who want to not only ask you questions, but they also want to teach you everything they know about communications too, right? I know you've had a few of those. I get them all the time. So how do you get the introverts more engaged, both on a digital platform and in a live environment, probably like a boardroom for the most part.
Yeah, that's tricky, right? And you never want to make anyone feel uncomfortable because if someone feels uncomfortable, walls close, you're done. You're never going to penetrate that. So I let the extroverts comment and speak in the beginning because it gets the ball rolling, right?
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
starts conversation. And then I tend to, if you have the liberty to do this, I tend to move my body over to the side of the room where the introverts are sitting.
Oh, okay.
And I make my comment or point right next to them. And I find that when I do that, they immediately perk up and they listen, whether they're participating or not. Moving my body across the room over to where the quiet people are gets them to be engaged. If I throw out a lot of questions, depending on the format, if it's a keynote, you don't necessarily do that. If
Right.
it's a workshop, yes, you do. So I will say, ask a question. The extrovert speaks first. Great, thank you. I'd love to hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet. I like to hear everybody's ideas. Then usually I can get one or two to come through there. By the time I'm done, I will have had most people speak up.
Cool.
But it's tricky because you definitely don't want people to feel uncomfortable, but I will continue to ask other people questions. Now, sometimes you get groups where there's a lot of people. So
Hmm.
then this is where you kind of have to also be a moderator slash facilitator. When you start opening up the invitation for discussion, then you got multiple people. So, and I
Hmm.
only, you don't want to get off track in terms of your timing because you still have to deliver your content. So I would typically say, all right, we're going to have Tom, Susan, and Jeff, and then we're going to get to the next question. And I basically just pick the first hands I see first. If you got a lot of talkers, you say, I have time for three ideas or three comments or three questions. I'm
Hmm.
going to do XYZ, and then we're going to move on. And if some of you still have questions, we'll make time at the end or just pop it in the chat. or come to me after.
So one of the things that happens so much is people are doing texting. And again, what we found out was that in the texting, people were losing the ability to influence through their own nonverbal communications, but with a text, unless they use a lot of emojis, they don't actually get to read people's emotions, their body language. You're just seeing words on your iPhone or on whatever brand you use. So is there a way, even when you text, you can be more influential when you're working with someone on the other end? Because leaders have to influence even in a text message.
Yes, I think messaging is even more important in text because people use what's called weasel words. In fact, you showed this book earlier. The first part of this book is about writing and writing for better communication. And Bezos was extremely successful at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Weasel words are words that don't impart any meaning and they don't advance the story. So in text, there's a lot of words that aren't helpful that have could be interpreted either way. You don't want to use words that are could be interpreted either way.
Mm-hmm.
A good example of this, a good analogy, my mother has Alzheimer's, and I'm in constant communication with her caregiver who speaks Spanish. So everything I write to her, I have to write it so that it would translate into Spanish very cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, I can't use words like shooting the breeze or kill two birds with one stone, right?
You
I
can't
can't
use
do that.
idioms, right?
No, because that doesn't translate into Spanish well. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to treat your text like that. Is this word confusing? Could it be interpreted in different ways? Just be clean and concise, short sentences, no buts. Uh, and if you are the first person, if you're initiating the text, then you're starting the string. So it should be very clean and concise. There should be at least one line that says, that's like a cordial statement,
Mm-hmm.
right? I hope you're doing well, or it's whatever that may be. And then you go straight to the point. What is it that you need in the text? And think about, don't use any words that don't impart meaning or that couldn't translate well if you had to translate it. Then the person responds. Then when you respond, you have to acknowledge what they said first before you dive into your next piece. So it takes a lot of analyzing and proofreading before you click send.
I'm terrible for editing myself, so I always have somebody else read my stuff, and I even when I'm doing a class or whatever, I will actually give someone the responsibility of seeing if they can find misspelled words or something like that. So that's the way I get to check because I sometimes read it and I don't see where I should have edited a word because my typing teacher once told me is if you ever make a mistake typing, you'll make that mistake the rest of your life. So I always know to get somebody to check my stuff during my, let's say, first live application of a class or what have you. Now I want to kind of switch to something that's probably a little bit more in both our wheelhouses after we've talked about digital communications. It's pretty common for the folks in my leadership community and the people that we're talking to today to have to deliver a presentation to a board, to deliver a presentation to a customer, to deliver presentations to a small group, such as teaching a class, uh, or maybe they're leading a 1 week Kaizen event or continuous improvement event. And so the tendency of the audience is most of my leaders, unless it's like an all hands presentation for like the entire production plant or the entire company, which can be digital and non-digital, right? How can our leaders be better, more effective leadership communicators in a room, say, of 25 to 30 people, or maybe 10 to 30 people, and use their body language both to influence as a leader and also to read the body language of the folks in the room when I don't have a computer to monitor to get little messages from my producer telling me that you're losing them. So how do we do a better job when we're doing live communications to small groups? And again, small groups could be anywhere from from 5 to 30 people and yet influence them as a leader. Okay. So, live leadership communication skills 101.
Yeah, so every context is different. Hypothetically, let's say it's a small group and everyone is sitting at a conference table. So you're sitting. If you're the leader of a conversation, you don't want to be sitting back like
What,
this
like
at the table,
this? Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You want to be sitting on the edge of your seat, leaning forward. You're the leader of at that table, so you always have to be mindful of how you're sitting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also important to make sure that you don't just talk to the same people at the table or the same side of the table. You have to
Mm-hmm.
consciously move around. If you're left handed or right handed, sometimes we tend to look, I'm right handed, so I tend to look to the right. And I have to force myself on, if I'm going to talk about point A, I'm going to look to the right. When I get to point B, I'm going to look at the end of the table. When I get to point C, I'm going to look to the left. And you just keep rotating. So if you are able to stand, I would stand. I would always stand, unless, of course, it's
Mm-hmm.
awkward because everybody's sitting down. Standing is important. And also, don't stand with your feet touching each other. They need to be spread apart like you would in athletics,
Right.
because your feet should be balanced with your shoulders, because that indirectly communicates confidence. And then you also, I call it the power sphere. So if I sit back so you can see more, from eye level out to the core, this space is your power sphere.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to be operating below it. That gives the impression of low energy. If I use my hands in this space, it communicates energy, it communicates confidence.
Am I in
So,
the power space right now, or do I need to back up a little bit more? And
well, the power sphere means using your hands, your
Mhm.
body, using your
Yeah, I
space.
tend to do this a lot.
Yeah, so you don't want to, if you keep your, a lot of people think in presentations they have to be formal, they have to
Mhm.
keep their hands together. And that becomes a tick that people can't stop looking at. It's a
Oh,
distraction.
good point.
So if you take your hand and you put it on a cat's tail, what does the tail do? You
I'm
try to
not a
pin.
I'm
So
not a
here's the
cat
thing.
person, so you know.
Here's the thing. If you try to pin a cat's tail down, the cat's tail flips out, does its own thing.
Right,
Don't put your hands, don't confine your hands,
right,
because
right.
your hands want to execute what's in the brain. So the moment you try to get formal and do the steeple, or like put your hands in your pocket or put them down at your side, it's become stilted, because your hands operate independently. They want to execute what's in your brain. And then I think, in terms of being able to read people,
Hmm.
look at their face and honestly pay attention to what they're doing, you as a presenter have to internalize your content and you have to
Hmm.
practice. Because
Okay.
if you're too worried about your message and remembering your notes and advancing your slides, you're too self absorbed. There's narcissism to the 10th degree.
Hmm.
You're not going to be able to read your audience. So it really does boil down to, have you spent enough time thinking about your message? What's my
Hmm.
log line? What story am I going to tell? How am I going to package it? And have I practiced it and internalized it so much that now I am free to look at the audience? And it's the same thing when I taught both of my daughters how to drive a car. They were paranoid about looking in all the mirrors and turning on the blinker. They physically remember doing all those things. Until you become a good driver, you
Right.
don't remember turning on the blinker. You don't remember any of that. You just, because you've internalized it. It's the same thing.
It becomes more heuristic, right? So,
When you can do that with your messaging, then I'm able to have fun looking at my audience members, calling them by name, moving away from the lectern or the notes, and engaging people, and realizing, the people in the back row aren't really paying attention. Either I'm not loud enough, or my information is boring, or I need to talk slower. Okay, let's repeat that. So you're not going to be able to do that if you don't have your message internalized.
right. How many times should you practice a presentation?
I get that question a lot, actually. And in the real world, it's hard. Most executives we work with are busy. They're
Hmm.
scheduled. They don't have time. But if they have a big presentation or a town hall or, an interview with the media, anything big coming up that's important, I would practice at least 10 times.
Yeah. Repetition is the mother of skill,
And
we like to say. So,
I like 10.
yeah.
And
I
you
always
and
use, there's a little bit of, uh, old school training within the industry says that when you're training somebody that you need to repeat it 7 times. So, and in the old radio days, it was you need to you need to say a number 5 times. I still see commercials where they still do that. Put a jingle with it, right? But yeah, 7 to 10 times. I think you're right on the money on that. If it's really important, even my students have to practice 7 times, and my leaders have to review it at least twice before the final. About I call it rule of thirds. The other thing is that you brought up was the tagline. One of the things that is in the book, the Bezos Blueprint, that my students have to learn is the Gallo method. The Gallo method, I even test them on the structure of the Gallo method. So the book alone is great for learning how Carmine and Vanessa teach their executives how to construct and craft a message that's very on point, and then how to build up the story to go along with the message, when to introduce facts and so forth. So the worth the price of the book to get the knowledge that comes from the Gallo method is absolutely a preferred method as far as the Lean Leadership Academy is concerned. So, is there anything else that comes to mind that you would advise our leaders on as far as verbal communications, nonverbal communications, and developing those skills?
there's two things. You can have a Ferrari. In this case, would be I'm equating that to a really strong message.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know how to drive it, meaning the body language of the delivery, it doesn't matter. That car stays in the garage unwasted. I see a lot of executives who have, especially in high tech companies that have huge budgets, these big conferences, the CEOs come out and they have all the bells and whistles. They have the Ferrari. They've got the beautiful slideshow. The audio visual team is set up. They got the prompters going. They've got video in their presentations. They've got people coming on, sharing the stage. They have the whole Ferrari, but
Mm-hmm.
they spend the whole time reading the prompter. So you still have to push yourself to internalize your content and figure out, why am I passionate about this message and how can I build that in? And I think the second thing that would be important to mention would be that we are all different people.
Mm-hmm.
We have different talents. And you have to understand, what is it that I do that
Mm-hmm.
makes me a good communicator might be different than what makes that person a good communicator. You need to understand what that is first, because that will essentially become your asset or your secret bullet or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes it's hard for us to identify what our strengths are, because humans are their own worst critic. They have trouble seeing what they do well. When someone says, "Wow, I really like how you did this." Really? I never thought of it that way before.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a high level executive and you want to get better and move the needle on communication skills, it's not bad to get a coach, because a coach could help you identify what you do well. Once you know what you do well, you don't have to worry about that. Then you can focus on what you can manipulate,
Mm-hmm.
what you can change, which is how much you practice and how much you make your message interesting, compelling, memorable, exciting. Those things are tangible, that can be changed. You can't change who you are. You can only
Mm-hmm.
change those two things. And once leaders, executives realize that, it's groundbreaking, because then they can take control over it and they can become an excellent communicator, because it's tangible and it's doable.
Awesome. Well, tell me what's up next for Gallo Communications. What's coming up next for you guys?
Well, we continue to do our work with Harvard. Carmine's actually at Harvard right now. And we also work with a lot of clients. We have a lot of client work coming in the pike. I've noticed that a lot of people are wanting to do stuff in person. which
Hmm.
adds challenge, but we're because it requires a lot of travel. And Carmine continues to write for Forbes and Inc., and he is in the process of submitting an audio product to his publisher. And
Oh,
it's probably going to come out the end of this year or beginning of 2026. And it is like a podcast, but it's not, it's a series that's packaged and sold like
okay.
an audiobook product. And
Okay.
he interviewed several leaders and experts in communication,
Hmm.
and it's called Viral Voices,
Hmm.
but it specifically speaks to how to be effective uh, in video format, in digital format, and communication in general. So it is like an audiobook, but it's got 10 chapters.
Hmm.
You might think of as episodes, but
Right.
it's a small audiobook. It does not have a print version to go with it. So
Okay.
that is a new product that Carmine will be releasing.
Okay. Well, so if someone is looking for a communications and body language coach, how do they get a hold of you?
So you can reach us at gallocommunications.com
Hmm.
or carminegallo.com. It routes to the same URL, and our contact information is on our site. You can also go to amazon.com and type in Carmine Gallo, and you can see a whole list of books that he's written on business communications. And Carmine Gallo TV
Hmm.
is his user handle on YouTube. And
Yep.
he's got a wealth of great short soundbite videos teaching you on all sorts of things in relation to communications. Very helpful videos. You don't have to hire a coach if that's out of your budget. Just use those videos as a resource. He also interviews a lot of great people that you can learn nuggets from.
Yeah, I follow obviously you and Carmine on LinkedIn. I have you on Instagram. Heck, I have your whole family on Instagram. And Carmine puts a lot of good stuff, a lot of shorts out on Instagram. I follow him on YouTube. So I would expect that everyone interested in communications to link up with Carmine and you on those platforms. Plus, for all of my leading leaders, I will also have Vanessa's and Carmine's information in the show notes. So, well, Vanessa, of course, can't wait to see you guys again in person. And hopefully, if I can't come out west to see you guys, if you're out this way, we'll link up that way. But other than that, I really want to thank you for your time today and just telling us so many great communication secrets that leaders need to focus on in the 21st century. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. It was a lot of fun doing this with you.